Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. How prevalent are armed conflicts around the world? What are the United Nations and other groups doing to help reduce armed conflicts? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at armed conflicts in various areas of the world and what are some of the causes of these armed conflicts. My guest today is someone who's working with an organization that has a wide range of various groups working to focus attention on this problem. My guest today is Ms. Gesa Bent. Gesa Bent is the gender coordinator with the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflicts. Ms. Bent also works in facilitating global partnerships cooperation with women, peace and security networks, and supporting gender-related advocacy on enhancing women's participation in conflict prevention and peace building. Gesa Bent, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's just get right into it, Gesa. The Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, commonly called GPPAC. What is this group? When was it formed? Why was it formed? And what do you basically do?
Yeah, GPPAC, or GPAC as we call it,
okay.
which is a little bit faster for a long name,
Okay.
Works to advocate for a shift from the reaction to the prevention of violent conflict. We are organized as a network of peacebuilding organizations organized in 15 regions worldwide. All these regions and members have their own mandate, our organizations in their own right, but membership in GPAC is something that they have signed up to in the period between 2003 and 2005 initially. So a lot of them have been with us since that time. And we are focusing our work on 4 priority areas, which are human security, dialogue and mediation, peace education, and preventive action.
Now, how do groups become part of your network? You've got, what, 150, 160 folks or groups around the world that are working on this. Do they contact you if they want to participate, or if you see that there is conflict, and there's probably conflict in every part of the world in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's not quite as deadly or lethal, but how do they participate and get involved in this? Can they just go to your website, or how would they do that?
Yes, they can. So we do have indeed about 150 active members and a more extended membership beyond that. We're also just in the process of online registration of all our members, which is a bit more challenging for some of them, of course, with internet access being a bit iffy in some of the regions. But generally, they apply for membership through the regional networks. So while at the Global Secretariat, which is where I'm based in The Hague, we coordinate the work around the 4 priority areas that I mentioned, and we coordinate advocacy to regional organizations and the UN. The regions, the 15 regions of our network are managed by one organization in each region, and members who want to apply to these members.
Mm-hmm. Now, if our viewers would like more information, they can go to GPAC to www.gppac.net.
Yes.
Not .org, not .net. They'll find much more information about the topics we're touching on today. Now, you're the gender coordinator. What exactly is the role of the gender coordinator in focusing on armed conflict or in other areas too?
So within GPAC, that role is focused on implementing the gender policy that the whole network adopted in 2010. And our policy has two main strands, two main priority areas. One is the so-called gender mainstreaming, so integrating gender perspectives throughout the work that we do on our other programs. So, for example, focusing on gender-sensitive conflict analysis as part of our preventive action program, gender integration in human security, so the human security of women and men on the ground, but also, for example, input on the role of women in mediation processes as part of our dialogue and mediation program. This is one aspect of our work. The other aspect focuses on advocacy, which we do together with our network of gender focal points, which have been appointed by our regional networks, so in 15 regions. With these gender focal points, a lot of them are active in implementing the resolution 1325 on women, peace and security that was adopted by the Security Council in 2000. They work at national and regional level to implement this resolution, or to with governments to implement this resolution. And we coordinate the advocacy work towards the UN, mostly focusing on the prevention aspect of the resolution in line with the mandate of our network. So women's roles in conflict prevention, also as opposed to prevention of violence against women. So taking it beyond women as recipients of aid, as recipients of programs, and focusing on the active role that women play in defining their own peace and security.
Now, you're focusing primarily on women, but you still have many men who are involved in your network.
Yes,
it's not
indeed.
just for women only, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, so unfortunately, most of our gender focal points are women. So I think
or
that
maybe
is also...
fortunately.
Well, I think fortunately, but also I would like to see some more men being involved in our gender
You'll
focal
have to
points
recruit
network.
them. There you go.
Yeah, and so part of the work that we do on the gender mainstreaming part of our work is also, since we are a network of women, men working together on gender-sensitive peace building, how do we engage in this together? How are women and men affected differently by conflict? What kind of roles are they often being pushed into? What kind of societal change does conflict cause? And how can, as part of their conflict prevention work, how can they respond and utilize their roles in order to foster dialogue between conflict parties?
You mentioned earlier the Security Council Resolution 1325.
Yes.
And that is there are many major resolutions that have come through the United Nations Security Council. Tell us a little bit about 1325. What is the thrust of it, and how do you incorporate it into what you're doing? I know there are many other elements within the UN focusing on this, and outside of the UN also, but what is 1325, and how are you bringing it in?
Mm-hmm. Resolution 1325 was adopted in 2000 by the Security Council, and it's since been referred to as the mother resolution of all the resolutions on women, peace and security. Personally, I very much think that 1325 is unique in that it emphasizes also the active role of women in conflict prevention, but together with the other resolutions that have been adopted since, it does focus more strongly on how are women affected by conflict, but also what kind of roles do they play in, how do their roles change, and how do they utilize their roles as women to prevent violent conflict. And since then, especially since last year, 1325 has also been strengthened by another resolution, 2122, which strengthens, I think, Resolution 1325 by putting specific responsibilities, also entailing responsibilities within the UN to foster implementation of the resolution.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like there has been an emphasis in the United Nations, I know under the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and also during the previous Secretary General Kofi Annan, to make or have more of a role for women, because women have such a critical part to play in every aspect of our society. And I know we've done interviews on this program with folks who have been involved with women peacekeepers, and that's a new concept. Well, not new today, but it was not too long ago. And I think Liberia was the first country that had women peacekeepers, and there are right now about 100,000 UN peacekeepers in 15 different missions. I'm not too sure how many are currently women, but I think it's over 1,000 at this juncture. But they have they can certainly play a very key role as far as being, I think, more. They can help women in conflict zones with their particular problems that perhaps men could not help with. But you see that that's certainly been a very active resolution, and one that's, I think, taken seriously, not only within the UN but also outside of the UN by a lot of other groups. Well, we've read so much about conflicts, and we could go from South Sudan to Darfur to Ukraine. There's been a conflict there. How do your folks deal with these? Let's just take Ukraine, for example. You've got Ukraine and you've got Russia. First off, do you have groups in that area that are part of your network, and what role are they playing to try to help reduce the tensions or the conflicts, potential conflict that's there?
Yes, we do. To answer your first question, yes, we do have members in both countries. And I think one of the strengths of GPAC is that we are organized in regional networks. So we are organized across national borders, and we often have members that are talking already about issues of common concern, even though their governments might not entirely agree on certain issues. And that's what our members are talking about probably right now as well, how to bring the different sections of the conflict together, how to really create a safe space for dialogue, which is really one of the most important mandates of GPAC, I think, and being mindful that this space sometimes is official, sometimes is unofficial, in order to keep it safe and to keep everybody in it safe. But at the same time, really maintaining the conversation. My colleague who supports the Eastern Europe region of our network has recently been to the regional meeting which took place in Ukraine, actually, which was before the situation escalated to what it is now. And he has since also reflected that there is a lot of, even beyond the peacebuilding groups in the country, there's a lot of dialogue going on, and there's a lot of people fostering dialogue in an individual capacity, which I think is interesting because, yes, of course, we have our membership organized in organizations, but we shouldn't forget that the capacity for dialogue and the capacity for prevention of conflict is very much there at an individual level, and everybody has this capacity inherently.
Exactly. Now, with your network, do you have training sessions for the folks? You mentioned you have your focal points, your advocacy people in various arrangements around the network. Do you have training programs for them, or how do you get folks to basically, I guess, get on board and to focus on some of the problems in their area? Are they already operating when they become part of your network, or do you have to work in training them?
Our members are usually already operating in one or several of the areas that we focus our work on, and they bring this expertise into the network. At the same time, they join our network because they're looking to exchange expertise, but also build their capacities on other issues that might be relevant more in the future in their region. And just to give an example, maybe with the ethnic clashes that took place in Kyrgyzstan a couple of years ago, we have members in Kyrgyzstan who do have expertise in dialogue and mediation, but they weren't sure. They were a bit overwhelmed with dealing with direct violence, dealing with the need for early warning, the need to really take action to prevent the conflict. So we connected them with our members in West Africa who do have 10, 15, 20 or more years of experience in working around violence in advance of elections, around really taking action, taking more ad hoc action. So we've been, and that's really one of the main mandates of GPAC as well, connect. We believe that the capacity to prevent conflict is there at the local level, but you need to connect the different local levels between countries, between regions, in order to enable for the prevention and the strengthening of capacities.
Right. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Today we're taking a look at armed conflict and the reduction of armed conflict, and my guest is someone who's very involved in this issue. My guest today is Ms. Gesa Bent. Gesa Bent is the gender coordinator with the Global Secretariat of the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflicts. Gesa, we're talking about armed conflicts and really the variety of reasons for armed conflicts too around the world. I guess you could have, it could be ethnic hatred, it could be, you could have food insecurity, food scarcity, a drought, you could have climate change, you could have economic inequalities, you could have political repression. I guess the list goes on, does it not?
Yeah.
You can't really say this is the reason, or you may have to introduce a whole panoply of reasons when you're looking at armed conflicts.
Yes, indeed, and I think our members are bringing in a lot of these different issues into our network, and I think that's probably one of the challenges of a global network as well, to coordinate around these issues without necessarily getting into each of them, and to manage our own capacities well, in order to be able to build the capacities of our members, but also speak with a single voice when needed. So our members in the Pacific, for example, are of course, very affected by climate change and will be even more so in the future. Our members in the Western Balkans work on peace education as part of the formal education curricula, and have done some very successful work with the ministries of education in the country. They have to deal with a lot of inter-ethnic tensions in schools. But they all do manage to connect their specific issues to the different programs that we coordinate. And since our members are the ones that define the priorities that we're working on, so they define that we work on peace education, they define that we work on human security, and they connect these issues to the programs that we coordinate. So making climate change as a driver of conflict, linking that to basic human needs and a people-centered approach to security.
Exactly. Now, in 2000, I think it was 189 of the countries at the United Nations General Assembly, just about all of them at that time, adopted the UN Millennium Development Goals, which were 8 logical, measurable goals to reduce abject poverty by 50% by 2015, to promote universal primary school education. A third one was to empower women. And of course, I'm sure, well, there are 5 more, but do you look at we'll just go through them very quickly, but to reduce infant mortality rates, to reduce maternal mortality rates, reverse the AIDS pandemic, to promote sustainable development, and to promote economic international cooperation amongst various countries and groups and that type of thing. Do you focus on 1 or 2 of them, like number 3, to empower women or to reduce maternal death rates, or do you look at the whole package, all 8 of them, when you're factoring in your efforts and when you're developing programs for your folks and working with your people around the world to focus on armed conflict? Do you factor in all 8 of them?
Well, first of all, I think our members do focus on certain ones of them as part of their work. As GPAC globally, we do have a focus on, I believe it's MDG 8, on fostering international cooperation. So that's what we're looking at more closely, also as a global conflict prevention network, which actually was launched in response to a call from then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan for civil society to network on conflict prevention. So we're very much linked to that part of the MDGs. We do link up to MDG 3. However, as we're also looking at the evaluation of the MDGs and the next phase linked to the post-2015 development agenda, we also advocate for a closer linkage and acknowledgement of the relationship between peace and security and the prevention of conflict as essential to sustainable development, which is something that we think has maybe been a little bit missing in the previous MDGs. So we do link to the MDGs, but we think the prevention of conflict, once again, should be more acknowledged as one of the main essential resources of sustainable development.
And building on the accomplishments of the 15 years from 2000 to 2015, some countries have achieved all 8 or will achieve all 8 of the Millennium Development Goals by December 31st, 2015. Others may achieve a few of them. Some, I don't know, I'm just guessing on this, may not achieve any of them, but I think every country will achieve some of the goals. But it's important to build on that framework, I guess, the foundation of having these 8 Millennium Development Goals, because that has really galvanized the world to a large degree. The United Nations, as someone who stands outside of the UN and looks in, I see just a wide panoply of issues that it deals with. But by focusing on these 8 goals, that has brought together faith-based groups, it's brought together groups such as yours, service clubs like Rotary International, Lions International, Kiwanis, business communities, just on across the board, to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 or more of these goals. And it's really important to build on that foundation, is it not, into the future?
Yes, I think so. And I think as we are in the review process, or as we are going into the review process of the MDGs, these connections are getting stronger. And I think the evaluation of the MDGs and the looking ahead to what do we want now? How can we take the next steps? And I think you mentioned the wide range of what the countries have or maybe haven't achieved. I think the importance of keeping everyone on board while also making the MDGs applicable to people at the local level, to make them applicable at the community level. What does empowering women mean at the community level? There might be very different issues, but making these connections, making the connections across the range of what countries have or haven't been able to achieve, but also keeping the connections between the local and the global level, I think that's going to be very important.
Now, if our viewers go to your website, I'm sure many of them will, they'll find a variety of things. One is, I went to it and I noticed you have a dialogue in the Great Lakes region. First off, where is the Great Lakes region? Secondly, what is this dialogue that you're sponsoring?
The Great Lakes region is in sub-Saharan Africa, and our project there takes into account 3 countries, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. Incidentally, as part of this dialogue project, which fosters dialogue between civil society in the different countries, but also links with our approach to engage dialogue between civil society and regional intergovernmental organizations. In this case, I'm only thinking of the acronym now, the ICGLR, the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region. So this is the type of dialogue that we're trying to foster in that region. And I will be going to Uganda at the end of this month, actually, to co-facilitate a workshop on gender and peace building. As part of a 5-day capacity building activity for our Ugandan members. And this capacity building has been parts of a needs assessment. So it's a 5-day workshop, and also in that 5-day workshop, we are integrating our gender, peace, and security commitments.
Exactly. Now, these topics are so important, and they just, we think we're not affected by these activities overseas, but we are. People who live in one part of the world can be affected by what's happening in other parts of the world. I'm just curious, though, when I look at what you're doing, you don't operate in isolation. You have a large network. You have 150, 160 other folks who are involved in this, or groups involved. Who are some of your other partners as far as maybe UN agencies or other non-governmental organizations or some other groups that work with you on these projects? Do you have certain ones that you work with more closely with than others?
Of course, I can speak mostly for the gender program.
Sure, yes.
Which we do have several partners, of course, in the regions. Also in Brussels, we work with the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office, which is basically our European liaison. They work a lot on peacebuilding in the EU. Here in New York, our partners are, on gender, peace, and security specifically, are a lot of the women's networks who are based here. The NGO Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security, which engages specifically with the Security Council on issues of women, peace, and security, and the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, which is also a network and focuses specifically on monitoring of the implementation of Resolution 1325. And more broadly, as part of our focus on human security, we also have connections with the Human Security Unit. And then, of course, we have a continued conversation with UN Women, which we also continue every year with our group of gender focal points here in New York in October, as well as conversations with government missions. because we do bring in local perspectives once a year for a week to the UN and to New York. And I think
you've got
this has
quite a
been
network.
Yeah,
That's quite a
exactly.
network
Yeah.
that you're cooperating with, and that's important because you need support. Obviously, we all do. There's greater strength in numbers and pooling resources. Well, the last minute or so we have, as you look over the horizon, what do you see as some of the major challenges confronting your group as far as trying to focus attention on conflict reduction, and how do you feel that these challenges might be met?
I think when I look at policies, one of the challenges is implementation. And really making it applicable. So, for example, while Security Council resolutions are not necessarily popular with all member states of the UN, making Resolution 1325 principles applicable to local realities, I think that's one of the challenges, but that is also one of the potential achievements that we can have. And yeah, I'm just thinking being a global network, I think, is a constant challenge, but also a constant reward, because consensus building takes time, takes very often a lot of capacity, and may not be as fast as developments here in New York. But at the same time, we do speak with a unified voice when we do, and that's very rewarding.
And that's what you're doing with the global partnerships for the prevention of armed conflicts. But Gesa Bent, it's a very important issue. It's one we need to learn much more about. And I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.